The call came late, as they usually did. Not with the sharp, insistent jangle of a daytime summons, the kind that promised a mundane missing person or a petty theft gone wrong. No, this was a creeping, insidious intrusion. A thin thread of sound that wormed its way into the quiet hours when the shadows stretched long and distorted, and the world itself felt a little less certain, a little more permeable to things unseen. It was a time when the edges of reality seemed to blur, and the whispers of the unexplained could more easily be heard. My office, such as it was, amplified this feeling. Tucked away on the third floor of a creaky brick building in a forgotten corner of Minneapolis, it was a sanctuary of the strange, a repository for the odd and the unsettling. The dim light, filtered through dusty windows, cast long, dancing shadows on the overcrowded shelves. Books lined the walls, not the crisp, clean volumes of modern thrillers, but ancient tomes bound in cracked leather, their pages filled with arcane symbols and forgotten lore. Strange artifacts cluttered every surface: a chipped obsidian skull, a petrified hand, a collection of oddly shaped stones arranged in a circle. Files overflowed from battered cabinets, each one a testament to a case that defied easy explanation, a mystery that whispered of things best left undisturbed. It was a place where the air itself seemed thick with secrets, where the mundane world gave way to something darker and more profound. My name is Cyrus Cade, and I'm a private investigator, but I specialize in the unexplained. The cases the cops don't want, the ones that make them shift uncomfortably and mutter about stress or mass hysteria. I deal in the things that go bump in the night, the mysteries that lurk in the shadows, the phenomena that science can't quite grasp. I'm the last resort for those who have nowhere else to turn, the one who listens when everyone else dismisses their fears as imagination or delusion. It's not a glamorous job, and it certainly doesn't pay well, but it's mine, and it's a grim comfort to know that I'm out there, standing between the ordinary world and the encroaching darkness. The woman on the other end of the line was Martha Coolidge. Her voice, when it finally came, was tight and trembling, stretched thin with a fear that went beyond simple panic. It was the kind of fear that clings to the bones, a cold, clammy dread that speaks of something fundamentally wrong. She spoke in short, halting bursts, as if each word was a painful admission. Her husband Thomas had vanished 3 days earlier, she said. He'd gone on a fishing trip, a weekend getaway to Blackwood Lake, a place he knew well. Too well, she emphasized, her voice cracking slightly. The sheriff thinks he just got lost, she told me, her voice hitching on the last word. They've searched the area, they say there's no sign of foul play. But it's not like him, Mr. Cade. Thomas knows those woods like the back of his hand. He's been going there since he was a boy. He wouldn't just wander off. There was a long pause, a silence filled only by the static hiss of the phone line, a sound that seemed to mirror the unease in the air. Then she continued, her voice barely a whisper. And there was something in his last message. He called me the night he arrived. He was excited, said the fishing was good, but then I heard something in the background. A sound. I don't know how to describe it. A kind of roar, but wrong. Not like any animal I've ever heard. It was low, guttural, and it made my blood run cold. It was like something human. Wrong was my business. Wrong was the currency of the strange little world I inhabited. I'd heard that word before, countless times, in countless voices, each one laced with the same chilling undertone. It was the word people used when they couldn't explain what they'd experienced, when the world tilted on its axis and the rules no longer applied. It was the sound of the unknown scratching at the edges of the known. Blackwood Lake. Even the name had a certain resonance, a dark echo that vibrated in my gut. It conjured images of deep, still water, of ancient forests, and hidden secrets. It was up in St. Louis County, a good 4-hour drive north of Minneapolis, deep in the heart of the kind of Minnesota wilderness that swallowed you whole and didn't bother to spit you out. The kind of place where the trees stood tall and silent, their branches intertwined to form a canopy so thick it blotted out the sun, where the shadows lingered even at midday, and the silence was broken only by the rustling of unseen things. I'd heard whispers about that place over the years, the kind of whispers that usually ended up in my files. Tales of strange lights in the sky, of inexplicable disappearances, of a sense of unease that clung to the very air. I told Martha I'd look into it. What else was I going to do? File another missing persons report under lost hiker, next to the growing stack of unsolved mysteries that cluttered my office, each one a silent testament to the things that the world preferred to ignore. I grabbed my coat, its worn fabric a familiar comfort, my camera, an extension of my own eyes in the darkness, and a healthy dose of skepticism. The only armor I had against the things that lurked in the shadows. It wasn't courage, not exactly. It was more like a grim determination, a refusal to let the darkness win without a fight. The drive north was, in its initial stages, deceptively uneventful. The familiar sprawl of the Twin Cities gradually gave way to the rolling hills and dense forests of central Minnesota. The interstate hummed beneath the tires, a steady rhythm that lulled me into a state of detached observation. The landscape was a blur of fading autumn colors, the vibrant reds and oranges of the maples, the golden yellows of the birches, the deep greens of the pines, all blending together in a painterly tapestry. The air grew progressively cooler, carrying the crisp scent of decaying leaves and the promise of approaching winter. But as I continued northward, the atmosphere began to subtly shift. The sky, once a clear, bright blue, became overcast, the sun a pale disk obscured by a veil of thin, gray clouds. The trees lining the highway seemed to grow taller, more imposing, their branches reaching across the road like skeletal fingers, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and writhed with the movement of the car. The cheerful chatter on the radio faded into static, replaced by a low, persistent hum that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. By the time I reached the turnoff for County Road 12, the main artery leading to Blackwood Lake, a knot of unease had settled in my stomach. It was a feeling I knew well, a primal instinct that whispered of unseen dangers and things that lay just beyond the realm of human understanding. The road narrowed, winding its way through increasingly dense forest. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches forming a dark, claustrophobic tunnel. The sunlight, already weak, was now almost completely blocked out, leaving me in a perpetual twilight. The small town nearest the lake, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled together as if seeking protection from the surrounding wilderness, amplified this feeling. It was a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time, a relic of a bygone era. The paint on the buildings was peeling, the windows were dark and vacant, and an unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional creak of a rusty sign or the mournful cry of a distant crow. The few locals I encountered were polite enough in a perfunctory sort of way, but there was a wariness in their eyes, a guardedness in their demeanor that spoke volumes. They were reluctant to meet my gaze, their eyes darting away when I asked about Thomas Coolidge. Their voices dropped to hushed tones when they spoke of Blackwood Lake, as if the very name held some ominous power. It was the silence that spoke volumes, the unspoken fear that hung in the air like the damp mist clinging to the pines. I stopped at the general store, a dimly lit establishment that smelled of sawdust and stale coffee, its shelves stocked with an odd assortment of fishing gear, canned goods, and dusty antiques. The man behind the counter, his face etched with deep lines and his eyes clouded with a distant sadness, was taciturn and unhelpful. He answered my questions with monosyllabic grunts, avoiding any direct mention of the missing man or the lake. It was only when I pressed him, showing him Thomas Coolidge's photograph and explaining the nature of my work, that he finally relented, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Strange things happen out there," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the worn wooden floor. "Always have. There's talk, old stories. Best to leave it be, mister. Some places ain't meant to be disturbed." Leave it be. It was advice I'd heard before, in countless variations, in countless unsettling locales. It was the advice of the fearful, the resigned, those who had learned the hard way that some mysteries are best left unsolved. But it was never my strong suit. I couldn't ignore the feeling that gnawed at me, the sense that something was deeply wrong at Blackwood Lake. I had a job to do, a missing man to find, and a growing suspicion that this case was anything but ordinary. The missing man's campsite was located in a small clearing near the lake, a patch of relatively level ground amidst the uneven terrain of the surrounding forest. It was a forlorn and desolate place, the silence heavy and oppressive, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the trees. The scene had an unsettling stillness, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting. The fire pit, a circle of blackened stones, was cold and dead, the ashes within damp and undisturbed. It looked as though it hadn't been used in days, an incongruity that immediately struck me as odd. If Thomas Coolidge had been here for 3 days, as his wife claimed, surely he would have lit a fire, especially given the increasingly chilly autumn nights. The tent, a faded green canvas dome, stood lopsided and forlorn, its flaps flapping listlessly in the wind like the wings of a wounded bird. It appeared hastily abandoned, the entrance slightly ajar, suggesting a sudden and unexpected departure. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned gear, no indication of a violent confrontation. A cursory examination of the immediate vicinity revealed nothing to suggest foul play in the conventional sense. Coolidge's backpack lay near the tent, its contents seemingly undisturbed. A half-empty can of insect repellent sat on a small folding table, along with a battered tin cup and a rusty multi-tool. His fishing rod, a sturdy graphite model, leaned against a nearby tree, the line still threaded through the guides. Everything was in its place, or rather, almost in its place, creating a sense of normalcy that was, in itself, deeply unsettling. It was as if the man had simply vanished, leaving behind the mundane trappings of his life as a cruel and mocking reminder of his absence. But amidst this veneer of normalcy, there were details that didn't fit, subtle anomalies that pricked at my senses, whispering of a reality that defied easy explanation. The first was the fish. Lying on a flat, smooth rock near the edge of the clearing was a fish. A large lake trout, its scales gleaming in the dim light. What made it so strange was not its size or species, but the way it had been prepared. It wasn't merely gutted or cleaned as a fisherman might do in preparation for cooking. Instead, it had been meticulously filleted, the flesh separated from the bones with surgical precision. The fillets were laid out side by side, as if on display, arranged with an almost artistic care. It was a bizarre and unsettling tableau, a grotesque parody of a culinary presentation. The act seemed deliberate, purposeful, imbued with a sense of ritual that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if the fish was an offering, a calling card left by some unknown entity. Then there were the tracks. They weren't immediately obvious, partially obscured by the fallen leaves and pine needles that carpeted the forest floor. But as I began to systematically examine the area around the campsite, my trained eye picked them out. They were unlike any tracks I had ever seen before. Too large to be human, far too large. Even the biggest man I'd ever encountered wouldn't leave prints like these. They were roughly oval in shape, but elongated, with a suggestion of 5 broad, splayed toes. The stride was impossibly long, suggesting a creature of immense size and power. But it wasn't just the size that was so unsettling. It was the depth of the impressions. These tracks sank deep into the earth, displacing a significant amount of soil and leaf litter. Whatever had made them was incredibly heavy, far heavier than any known human or animal that might inhabit these woods. And there was something else. Something about the way they were spaced and the way they pressed into the earth that suggested a bipedal gait, an upright posture. This was no 4-legged animal. This was something that walked on 2 legs. The tracks led away from the campsite, heading into the dense undergrowth, towards the darker, more impenetrable depths of the forest. I followed them for a short distance, my heart pounding in my chest, my senses on high alert. The trees grew taller and thicker, their branches intertwining to form a natural barrier that blocked out most of the remaining light. The air grew colder, heavier, and the silence deepened, becoming almost palpable. And then the tracks simply stopped. They ended abruptly, as if the thing that had made them had vanished into thin air. There were no signs of a change in direction, no indication of where it might have gone. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed it whole. The sudden cessation of the tracks was more unsettling than their existence. It defied logic, challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world. As I stood there, staring at the spot where the tracks disappeared, I became aware of another presence, a subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. It was a scent, faint but distinct, that hung in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of damp soil and pine needles. It was a musky odor, something animal, but not like any animal I recognized. It was a primal scent, raw and untamed, with a hint of something else, something acrid and strangely sweet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was a scent that spoke of the wild, of the unknown, of something ancient and powerful that lurked in the shadows. That night, I stayed at the only motel in town, the Blackwood Motel. Even its name seemed to carry a hint of the sinister, a subtle suggestion of the darkness that clung to this place. It was a creaky, dimly lit establishment, its faded neon sign flickering intermittently in the night, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the peeling paint of the building. The air inside was thick with the musty odor of stale cigarettes and damp wood, a smell that spoke of neglect and forgotten memories. The whole place had an air of abandonment, as if it had been left to slowly decay, a place where time itself had slowed to a crawl. Sleep was elusive. The unsettling discoveries at the campsite had left me on edge, my mind racing with questions and theories, none of which seemed to offer any logical explanation for what I had found. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sounded like something else, something moving in the darkness, something watching. I kept imagining those tracks, those massive three-toed prints that defied all biological understanding. I saw again the image of the filleted fish, laid out with such bizarre precision, and I felt again that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being observed by unseen eyes. The next day, I decided to delve deeper into the local lore, to see if I could find any answers, any patterns, in the history of this strange and unsettling place. I visited the town library, a small, dusty repository of forgotten history. It was a quiet, cavernous space, filled with the scent of aging paper and leather-bound books. The librarian, a thin, elderly woman with wispy gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of secrets, was initially hesitant to assist me. But when I explained my investigation and the disappearance of Thomas Coolidge, she relented, her expression grave. She led me to a section of the library dedicated to local history, a collection of yellowed and brittle newspaper articles, faded photographs, and handwritten accounts of the region's past. It was here that I began to uncover the dark secrets of Blackwood Lake. The stories spanned decades, these accounts, and they all shared a common thread. People vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of unease and fear. There were tales of entire families disappearing from their cabins, of lone hunters who ventured into the woods and were never seen again, of strange lights flickering over the lake at night. The details were always vague, the explanations always unsatisfactory. One account from the 1930s spoke of a group of loggers who had vanished overnight. Their camp was found abandoned, their tools left neatly stacked, their fire still smoldering. It was as if they had simply walked away from their lives, leaving everything behind. The only clue was a series of strange symbols carved into the bark of a nearby tree, symbols that no one could decipher. Another story from the 1960s described a young couple who had disappeared while hiking. Their car was found parked by the lake, the keys still in the ignition, their picnic basket packed and ready. A search party scoured the area for weeks, but no trace of them was ever found. The local newspaper at the time attributed their disappearance to a tragic accident, a fall into the lake, perhaps, or a run-in with a wild animal. But reading the account, I sensed a deeper, more sinister truth lurking beneath the surface of the official explanation. The explanations offered for these disappearances, lost hikers, animal attacks, accidents, seemed woefully inadequate. They were the explanations of a world that preferred to cling to the familiar, to ignore the things that didn't fit neatly into its tidy categories. But reading these stories, I felt a growing sense of unease, a chilling certainty that these disappearances were connected, that something else, something far more malevolent, was at play. The morning dawned with a heavy mist hanging over Blackwood Lake, a scene that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The rising sun, a pale disk behind the fog, cast an eerie glow on the water, turning it into a sheet of shimmering, opaque glass. The air was damp and cold, carrying the same musky scent I'd noticed at the campsite, only stronger now, more pervasive. It was as if the forest itself was exhaling, releasing some ancient, primal odor that spoke of things best left undisturbed. Despite the apprehension that gnawed at me, the pull of the mystery was too strong to resist. I had to go back to the woods, to follow those tracks, to try and make sense of the unsettling evidence I had found. I gathered my gear: a backpack with extra batteries, a high-powered flashlight, a compass, a first aid kit, and a camera. I also took the precaution of arming myself with a sturdy hunting knife, a relic I'd inherited from my grandfather. It was a poor substitute for a firearm, but it was better than nothing. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees were ancient and gnarled, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for me. The undergrowth was thick and tangled, making progress slow and difficult. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional, unsettlingly close call of an unseen bird and the distant, mournful howl of what might have been a wolf, but sounded different. I followed the tracks as best I could, though they were becoming increasingly faint and difficult to discern. The forest floor was uneven, covered with a thick carpet of decaying leaves and pine needles that obscured the impressions. But I pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, determined to find some explanation for the mystery that surrounded Blackwood Lake. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, though its light barely penetrated the dense canopy of the trees. I pushed through tangled thickets, climbed over fallen logs, and waded across a shallow, icy stream. The tracks led me deeper and deeper into the heart of the forest, further and further away from any semblance of civilization. And then, I saw it. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. A trick of the light, perhaps, or a fleeting glimpse of some large animal. But as I got closer, my heart began to pound in my chest, a cold dread gripping me like a vice. There, standing in a small clearing about 50 yards ahead, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, perhaps even taller. It was bipedal, standing upright like a man, but its body was covered in thick, dark hair. Its limbs were long and powerful, its hands ending in large, 3-fingered claws. Its head was large and vaguely humanoid, with a broad, flat face, a heavy brow ridge, and eyes that glowed with an eerie yellow light. It was the creature from the tracks. It stood motionless, its head cocked to one side, as if it was listening, or perhaps watching. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a primal fear, a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing. This was no animal. This was something else, something other. The creature turned its head slowly, its glowing eyes fixing on me. I felt a jolt of electricity, a sense of connection or perhaps intrusion, as if it were looking into my very soul. It took a step forward, and I could hear the heavy thud of its footfalls on the soft earth, a sound that resonated deep within my chest. I knew in that instant that I had to run. I turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth, the creature's heavy footsteps echoing behind me. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop. I ran blindly, driven by pure, unadulterated terror. The image of those glowing yellow eyes burned into my mind. I didn't dare to look back. I ran until my lungs burned, my legs ached, and my heart felt like it was about to burst. Finally, gasping for breath, I stumbled into a small, abandoned cabin, its wooden walls rotting and covered in moss. I collapsed against the door, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I had seen it. I had seen the creature from Blackwood Lake, and the sight of it had changed everything. The abandoned cabin offered a temporary refuge, a place to catch my breath and try to process the sheer impossibility of what I had seen. The interior was a single, dusty room, sparsely furnished with a rickety table, a couple of overturned chairs, and a rusted wood-burning stove. A few tattered remnants of what might have been curtains hung limply in the grimy windows, admitting only a meager amount of light. It was a place of decay and neglect, a far cry from the cozy woodland retreat it might have once been. But for now, it was shelter. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the creature I had encountered with anything I knew or understood. It defied classification, existing outside the boundaries of known biology. It was a creature of myth and legend, something that shouldn't exist, yet did. The glowing yellow eyes, the sheer size and power, the way it moved, It was all imprinted on my memory with terrifying clarity. As the initial shock began to subside, a grim determination took its place. I couldn't leave Blackwood Lake without answers. I had to know what this creature was, where it came from, and what its connection was to the disappearances. The local lore, the strange tracks, the filleted fish, the creature itself. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a disturbing puzzle that I was compelled to solve. The next morning, I returned to the spot where I had seen the creature. I moved cautiously, my senses on high alert, the hunting knife held tightly in my hand. The clearing was empty, the only evidence of the previous day's encounter being the disturbed earth where the creature had stood and the broken branches where I had fled in terror. I decided to focus on the tracks. If I could find more of them, perhaps I could learn something about the creature's movements, its habits. I spent hours scouring the forest floor, carefully examining every indentation, every broken twig. My efforts were rewarded when I found another set of tracks, leading away from the clearing, deeper into the woods. These tracks were clearer, more distinct than the ones I had found near the campsite. They showed the same elongated oval shape, the same suggestion of 3 broad, splayed toes. But they also revealed something else, a pattern. The tracks weren't random. They followed a specific path, a route that seemed deliberate and purposeful. As I followed the tracks, I began to notice other anomalies in the forest. Several trees had deep gouges in their bark, as if they had been clawed by something with immense strength. I found piles of broken branches stacked neatly together, almost like markers. And then there was the silence. The deeper I went, the less wildlife I encountered. The birdsong that had been a constant backdrop in the outer parts of the forest was now absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The tracks led me to a part of the forest I hadn't yet explored, a dense, swampy area near the northern edge of the lake. The trees here were even taller and more twisted, their roots submerged in the murky water. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the buzzing of insects. It was a place that felt ancient and primeval, a place where the normal laws of nature seemed to hold less sway. In the heart of the swamp, I found a clearing. And in that clearing, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. It was a structure of sorts, a crude altar constructed from massive stones and logs, arranged in a circle. In the center of the altar was a large, flat rock, stained with what looked like dried blood. And surrounding the altar were more of those strange symbols carved into the trees, the same symbols that had been found near the old logging camp. The symbols were unlike any I had ever seen before. They were geometric in design, with sharp angles and flowing lines, and they seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. They radiated a sense of power, of ancient energy, and they filled me with a feeling of dread. As I stood there staring at the altar, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The disappearances, the tracks, the filleted fish, the creature, the symbols. It was all connected. This creature wasn't just some random animal. It was something more, something intelligent, something ritualistic. And Blackwood Lake wasn't just a place of natural beauty. It was a place of dark secrets, a place where ancient forces were at work. I realized I was dealing with something far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The discovery of the altar sent a shiver down my spine, a cold wave of dread that washed over me, extinguishing any remaining vestiges of scientific curiosity. This was no longer a simple case of strange disappearances or an encounter with an unknown creature. This was something darker, something ancient and malevolent. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had stumbled upon a ritual site. The implications were staggering. The creature wasn't merely hunting, it was performing some kind of sacrifice, using the filleted fish, those massive 3-toed tracks, and perhaps even the missing people, in its terrifying rites. The symbols pulsing with that eerie light were the key, a language of some forgotten power. Blackwood Lake was not just a scenic location. It was a nexus, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. I had to get out of there. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to flee. But as I took my first step, a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. A low, guttural growl, echoing through the trees, closer now, much closer than before. The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive form moving with a speed and agility that belied its size. Its glowing yellow eyes fixed on me, burning with an unholy light. In its clawed hands it held something, a human skull. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a monster, it was a predator, a killer, and a participant in some horrific ceremony. The skull was a trophy, a relic of its dark deeds. The creature growled again, a sound that vibrated through the forest, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. It began to move towards me, its gait a strange combination of animalistic lope and upright stride. There was no escape. I drew my hunting knife, my hand trembling. It was a pathetic defense against such a creature. But it was all I had. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the creature's glowing gaze, my mind racing, searching for any possible way out of this nightmare. The creature lunged. I sidestepped, narrowly avoiding its outstretched claws. The knife flashed in the dim light, a desperate parry against an impossible foe. The creature roared in fury, its breath hot and fetid on my face. The stench of decay and something else, something ancient and foul, filled the air. The fight was brief and brutal. I was no match for the creature's strength and speed. It swatted me aside like a rag doll, sending me crashing against a tree. Pain exploded in my shoulder, and I knew with a sickening certainty that something was broken. The creature advanced, its shadow falling over me. I lay on the ground, helpless, my knife clattering uselessly on the forest floor. This was the end. But then, something unexpected happened. A high-pitched wail pierced the air, a sound that was both haunting and strangely compelling. The creature froze, its head cocked to one side, its glowing eyes flickering. The wail came again, closer now, and the creature hesitated, as if torn between its prey and some other, more urgent call. The wail grew louder, and the creature turned away from me, its massive form disappearing into the dense undergrowth. I lay there, battered and broken, listening to the sound fade away, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know what had saved me, whether it was some natural phenomenon or something even stranger. But I knew I couldn't stay. I had to get out of Blackwood Lake, and I had to warn others about the horrors that lurked within its depths. It took me hours, agonizing hours, to crawl and stumble my way back to the cabin. I was weak, injured, and terrified, but the will to survive, the need to escape, kept me going. When I finally reached the abandoned structure, I collapsed inside, my body trembling, my mind haunted by the images of the creature and the altar. The next morning, I managed to make it back to the town, my body aching, my spirit shattered. I went straight to the police, recounted my experience, and urged them to investigate. But my story was met with skepticism and disbelief. They dismissed it as a hallucination, the product of stress and exhaustion. I knew they wouldn't believe me. How could they? I had seen something that defied all logic and reason, something that belonged in the realm of nightmares. But I also knew that I wasn't crazy. What I had seen was real, and the danger was very, very real. I left Blackwood Lake as soon as I could, driving away as fast as my car would take me. The image of the lake and the creature burned into my mind. I never looked back. I don't know what the future holds for Blackwood Lake. I don't know if the creature is still out there, if the rituals continue, if more people will disappear. But I do know that I will never forget what I saw, and I know that I will never return.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.